Okay, in this segment, we're going to finish up going over the exercise. So we have, that is exercise 5. Either Katara does not criticize Toph or Toph yells at Katara. Katara does not criticize Toph and Toph yells at Katara are the atomic propositions. They're going to get letters, not P for Katara does not criticize Toph, and Q for Toph yells at Katara. If Toph is tough, then Aang struggles to learn from her. So we have Toph is tough and Aang struggles to learn from her. They're both new, so they get distinct letters. We have if Aang struggles to learn from Toph, then Katara criticizes Toph. Those are both old, so they're going to get the same letters that they got before, except where we had Katara does not criticize Toph up here for not P, we're going to have positive here, P, because Katara criticizes Toph. And then we have Toph is tough, which is R, and we conclude that Toph yells at Katara, which is Q. So now to represent the reasoning, I'm just going to stick numbers along. So I'm going to start with Toph is tough. Remember, you can start wherever you want. I like to start with simple things. Toph is tough is simple. So I'm going to call that number 1, R, premise. Then I'm going to go up here and call this one, if Toph is tough, then Aang struggles to learn from her, number 2. So that's going to be if R, then S. Now I'm going to draw a conclusion. This is my first intermediate conclusion. Why? Because I know R, and I know R gives me S, so I'm going to start with S. So I'm going to start by concluding S. Now, kind of what I'm doing is, just so you know how I'm going about this, I started with R because it's simple, and then I look through the rest of this and I see, is there another R? And I find an R here, and then I ask, given this one, that R is true, and given that there's an R in this premise, can I do anything with those two together? And indeed I can, right? Because R gives me S, and I know R, so I know S. And then I just go ahead and do that. Now what I'm going to do is I have this S here, and I'm going to look through the remaining premises. I've already used this one, and I've already used this one, to see if there's anyone that has an S. Well, this one doesn't, but this one does. So I ask myself, if I know S, and I know S gives me P, is there anything I can do with those two? There is, so I'm going to label it. And I know S gives me P, and I know S, so I'm going to draw the conclusion P. Now I've used all 3 of these, so I better be able to do something with this, can't I? Well, I know either P is false or Q is true, and I know P is true, so that kind of crosses out P is false, which is going to leave me with Q. So I can now use this one, not P or Q, plus P. The P crosses out the not P, so it leaves me with the Q, and I get conclusion Q, which is what I was after. So this argument is valid. I've used modus ponens twice and disjunctive syllogism once. I could have done it in a different order, of course. I could have labeled this number 1, and then I would have started with not P or Q. And sometimes it's helpful. Notice I'm now labeling them serially, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But remember, I needed to draw an intermediate conclusion, so I'm going to need a way to label that. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'll say not P or Q, and I'm going to just go R then S. I'm going to go S then P. I'm going to go R, and where I want to get is Q, but I can't get directly from Q to Q from these 4 because there's no rule that says, given these 4, you can conclude Q, so I need my intermediate conclusions. So how will I represent them? I'm going to just use a little a. I'll say 4a is S. How did I get S? From R then S and R, so from 2 and 4. Now 4b is P. How did I get P? Well, I used 3 and 4b. So 3 says S then P. Sorry, I should say 4a. 4a is S. Let me just change that while we're here. So how did I get P? Well, 3 says S then P, and 4a says S, so that tells me P. Now I take P and I stick that back into the very first one, not P or Q, and that gives me Q. So what I want you to see here is sometimes you might want to just list out your premises and number them in order and number your conclusion. Then you just need to use some other way to represent your intermediate conclusions. I actually prefer not to have the 4 here because that makes it sound like they're connected to 4, so I prefer to have it represented like this. So just with a and B for my intermediate conclusions. Okay. I'm just illustrating that you can do it all sorts of different ways. You can start in all sorts of different places. You can do it in the order. The order here doesn't matter. You can label them, list them out in order and then draw the conclusions. You could use number 6 to draw your intermediate conclusion here, and number 7 to draw your intermediate conclusion there. The numbering doesn't matter. What matters is the logical structure, which is the same across these 3 ways of labeling the argument. Here's the final problem, I believe. already completed. If Carter sent munitions to Suharto, as Suharto ordered mass killings, then he enabled genocide. That's if P then Q. Then we have if Carter enabled genocide, then he may be guilty of crimes against humanity. That's if Q then R. If he may be guilty of crimes against humanity, then he should be tried before the World Court. That's if R then S. Notice I drew an intermediate conclusion here. Why? Because I saw I could. P gives me Q, Q gives me R, so P gives me R. And that's what I concluded. Now I have R gives me S. Well, I can draw another one. P gives me R gives me S, so P gives me S. And that's what I concluded here as an intermediate conclusion. Now I come back down here and I have P. Carter sent munitions to Suharto. That's P. So now I know that P gives me S and I know P, so I can conclude S. So that's one way you could do this problem. Another way you could do it is you could just, as I said before, list out everything. P then Q, Q then R then S, and P. Those are your 4 premises. And then go ahead and draw your intermediate conclusions. And notice that numbering things over here allows us to keep track. So even though I'm drawing this conclusion from stuff way up there, I know exactly where it's coming from because I can look here and see it's from numbers 1 and 2. And that similarly, I can look here and see this one's from 2a and 3. And look here and see that the final one's from 3a and 4. Okay. There's a couple other arguments here. You can pause and look at these. I'm not going to talk through. I've kind of said what I had to say, except for this final one here. I'm going to talk through because there's something a little different about it. So we have if Zuku defends Fire Nation colonies in the Earth Kingdom, then the treaty fails. That's if P then Q. And we have if Zuku defends the Fire Nation in the Earth Kingdom, then the treaty. If Zuku doesn't defend the Fire Nation colonies in the Earth Kingdom, then the treaty fails. That's if not P then Q. And you're supposed to get to Q. And that looks a little weird. How can you do that? Well, one way you can do it is by adding in P or not P as an axiom. There's other ways. Why can I just add in P or not P? Why can I just add in a premise that wasn't part of my initial argument? Because P or not P is just an axiom of logic. It's like if P then P. It's like not P and not P. Those are all axioms, and you can always add an axiom into an argument because an axiom is what's called a logical truth. It's a truth of the system. It doesn't matter what content you assign to P, so it doesn't matter what P represents. P or not P is always true in the system because it's saying there's no netherland between truth and falsity, which is a presumption of the system, which means you can always have it as a premise. And once I do that, I can say, well, P gives me Q, not P gives me Q. I know P or not P, which means I know one of these is right. P or not P, which means I know one of these is right, which means I know Q or Q. And if Q or Q, then Q. Okay, I'm going to stop this segment there.